which is 3H1 is the wing that we're in here. 3H1, 2, 3, and 4, and then Walt's offices, 5 and 6. So we call it 3H. Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
Welcome. It's good to see you.
Okay, all right.
Thanks for being here. We'll chat.
Do you want to move in that room because this is clicking?
Yeah, this door clicks, so we'll just push you on in here. This area was the reception area for Walt's offices. He had all the suites, all the offices in this suite were Walt Disney's offices. So the first two doors down there were where they kept, his assistant had a file room down there. They also had a room where Walt Disney kept his miniatures. Walt was a miniatures collector, and he was sent miniatures from all over the world. When people found out that he liked them and collected them, they would send them to him. You'll see some of the collection inside, but most of them now reside at the Walt Disney Family Museum. But when Walt was here, that second office down the hall actually had miniatures on display. So that was his display room for the miniature collection. Then the next office here on the other side of this wall was the reception office. Originally, this office didn't bump out this far. It actually had a reception office in there, and this area over here was open. That's where people would come in and sit down and wait to have their appointment. And then this office that you're in right now was the secretary's office. So Dolores Vaught, his longtime secretary, sat at a desk there under the window. And this piece here was not originally in this office. This was a recreation piece, but all the awards that are in it are original. This piece sat in the reception area next on the other side of this wall. But these are all awards that Walt Disney won during his lifetime. The one on the top is a recreation. That's actually a prop from the film Saving Mr. Banks. But on top of this bookcase and award case over there in that office, he would have his Academy Awards. Walt won 32 Oscars in his lifetime, which is the record. He's about 3 times as many as anyone else. And the most famous Oscar is the one up above, which was 1 Oscar and 7 little ones, which was the special Oscar that was given to Walt Disney for Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. It was a special Oscar. It's one of a kind. The original, the real one, resides up at the Walt Disney Family Museum because the family kept that one after Walt's passing. But we helped with the recreation of Walt's offices for the film Saving Mr. Banks. And so that is the prop version that was in the movie. So if you look closely in the movie, you'll see that. We just thought it would be fun to put up there just so people know where that Oscar originally sat. But this office was the first place you'd come in. If you had an appointment with Walt Disney to go into his formal office, you would come here first and check in with his secretary, Dolores. The furniture here is not the original. That was not kept. Dolores' furniture was not kept. But that is a Kem Weber desk, which Kem Weber was the architect who designed all the furniture that you'll find in Walt's offices. And that is a Kem Weber desk, so we put it in here. The typewriter and typewriter table are original. Those were from Walt's office suite, probably from this office. And the file cabinet is actually from this office. Most of the other things on the desk there are props from Saving Mr. Banks. But the red desk diaries are original and real. And Walt Disney's appointments were kept by his assistants. And they would do a kind of a double system where they would write it into 2 books. One of them Walt kept in his office, and so he could see his appointments. The other was kept by the secretary, so they always knew where he needed to be. So this room is just a little bit of a recreation of the office until about 1969. And at that time, Roy O. Disney, who was then chairman of the company, he was Walt's older brother. Roy was still here running the company, and he decided that it would be a really good idea to inventory Walt's offices before they were dismantled. So he hired Dave Smith, who is the founder of the Walt Disney Archives, my boss, who retired in 2010. And he went through and spent a year inventorying this office and cataloging every single thing that was here. And then at that point, they packed everything up and took it out. And then these offices were remodeled for the next CEO, who was Ron Miller, Walt's son-in-law. And so they did some major changes to the suite at that time. They moved things around. That door was moved over here. They took out all the paneling. They added in some features. This area right here used to be a bathroom and closet. This was changed and added. This was kind of bumped out. So there's quite a bit of construction done in here. And it didn't look much like it did in Walt's time anymore. After Ron Miller left the company in 1984 and Michael Eisner and Frank Wells came in, they did a little more remodeling then. And so this suite was still the CEO's suite for many, many years. Then when the Team Disney building, the one with the dwarfs on the top, was constructed and opened in 1992, then the CEO's office moved into that building. And then Roy E. Disney, Walt's nephew, took over the suite. And so he was here for many years as well. After Roy left the company, it was used by major producers. Sean Cassidy used it for a while, his production company, and then most recently Mark Cherry, who was the producer of Desperate Housewives and a number of other things. So when Mark Cherry left the company it was in June last year, we got the opportunity. The suite was going to be empty, and our CEO, Bob Iger, and his executive team decided that they would allow us to do what we've been dreaming about for years, which was to take this suite and put it back the way Walt had it. We still had all of the materials and objects that were in this suite to begin with, in Walt's 2 offices. So we were very fortunate. That's a very rare occurrence. That's something that would last that long and be intact. But we were able to reconstruct this suite and put all the materials back into Walt's offices the way they originally were when he passed on in 1966. There are a few small pieces that we had to recreate, just as we did in this office with the awards cabinet. We had to create one couch, which is on the opposite wall here, you'll see, and a couple built-in pieces that were not saved. But almost everything else you see in that suite is the original thing that was there when Walt Disney worked here. So it's pretty special and pretty unique, I think. Our original, but the couch was a recreation. That particular wall was not reserved because these offices were on display down at Disneyland as part of the Walt Disney Story for several years. And like a theater production, there was one wall that had to be the audience, and so that wall was where the glass was. So those pieces were not kept. So the studio mill here, who did all the restoration work on this suite, actually recreated those pieces for us. So all of the construction and reproduction and everything was done here internally, in-house, by our studio mill and craftsmen here at the studio who build sets and do facilities work here, but this was kind of a special thing for them, and they did it with a lot of love. We tried to get everything as accurate as possible. He bought in Paris, and one of them he bought in New Orleans. We're not sure which is which, but he did bring them back here to the studio, and he had the technicians here take them apart and figure out how they worked. And so that's what gave him the idea to do the audio animatronic program. It started out with the Tiki birds, came out at Disneyland in the Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room in 1963. And then, of course, that was the granddaddy of Mr. Lincoln and the Pirates of the Caribbean and the Haunted Mansion Ghosts and everything else since. So that's a very special piece. The one in the corner does still work. This one, unfortunately, does not. One of his grandchildren was playing with it and broke it. So it's still sitting there, but it doesn't run. The grand piano is another very special piece in here. That piano is a unique original. The case on it was designed by Kim Weber, who was the architect who designed the look and feel of the studio and actually designed all of the furniture in Walt's suite and in the studio at the time. The case was made by Kim Weber to match the furniture, and the piano workings inside are from 1914. This is the piano that all the composers that worked here at the studio from 1940 to 1966 would come up and play when they would pitch a song to Walt or play something for him for his approval. They would do it in this office on that piano. And as Dave said in the movie, Richard Sherman used to come up here quite often. He and Bob would come up and they would play for Walt. Sometimes, when they were showing him a new tune they'd created, and sometimes just to make him feel good and play for him on Friday evening or something just for fun. But it's a very special piece, and it's a beautiful piano. It still plays beautifully, and Richard plays it occasionally, comes up and plays it for us as well. So we're very pleased to have that in here. All of the materials on top of it are as Walt left them. That's the original sheet music that he still had up there, and as are the books on the case office, which was Walt's working office. This particular office was mostly used for meet and greets, for playing the piano, big meetings when they needed a lot of space. He would also sit down here at his desk and sign things, and if he needed a little room to spread out, if he was doing fan cards or autographing letters, things like that, he would do that in the morning. He'd come in here and do that kind of thing first, and then move into the working office where the real work got done. It was originally designed to be a conference room, but Walt found that he wanted something a little more intimate, and so these are the things that the projects that Walt was working on at the time. This particular aerial map of Disneyland, you can see that Walt had things labeled in different colors. So the things that were in red were things that had recently been added or opened, attractions that were current. Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, which opened in 1963. Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln that came to Disneyland after the New York World's Fair. So things like that. The things in yellow were things that were coming. Now when Walt passed away in 1966, It's a Small World, which is listed as a coming attraction, had already opened. And you can see New Orleans Square had also opened. That was one of the last projects that Walt worked on. It opened in 1966, but in 1967, the attraction, Pirates of the Caribbean, opened after his passing, but that was the spot where they were building it. An interesting thing too was the Haunted Mansion. You can see that the mansion is actually there, but if you look behind the train tracks, you can see some construction area there, and that's where the show building is for the Haunted Mansion attraction. The attraction, even though the building had been built, the actual attraction had not been built when Walt passed away. It didn't open until 1969, but had been started quite a bit earlier. So this was, kind of this is coming attractions here. As you can see, the things that he had in there with showing the plane. This is a picture of Ed Wynn, who was kind of Walt's lucky star. He was a man that Walt loved dearly and had put in several of his movies, which were all very highly successful, so he was kind of Walt's lucky charm. Mr. Lincoln there from the attraction Great Moments of Mr. Lincoln that premiered at the New York World's Fair and then went into Disneyland. Walt admired Abraham Lincoln very greatly. He was one of Walt's heroes. And in the other office, there's a bust of Lincoln. So he had many things that reminded him of Mr. Lincoln. It was one of the people that he probably admired the most were Abraham Lincoln and Mark Twain. And then some other pieces there. This is the site that originally the Cal Arts, which was a university School of Art that Walt Disney helped found. And originally it was going to be located at the Golden Oak Ranch, which is now our movie ranch up in Santa Clarita. It was eventually installed at Valencia instead, but this little map there shows it at Golden Oak, which was the original plan. And then, of course, that was Walt's design for Walt Disney World. That was what he was envisioning, what he called the Florida Project, or what eventually became Epcot. It was quite a bit different than what ended up being Epcot at Walt Disney World, but that was the original design that Walt had in mind. Picture there of his brother Roy with him. And it's a fun piece. This is Maurice Chevalier. So ask me why, and I don't know for sure. I do know that he had some back injuries when he was younger. He played polo and injured his back. And so maybe sitting down low helped.
It was always piled with scripts and drawings and blueprints and stuff. Our call table doesn't work. It was we'd come in here and there's always something rolled up and we'd lay it out over here. Because there was always pouring over stuff
on it. Okay,
yeah,
that
so
makes more sense.
Yeah, a little table. Yeah, because the guys could sit here and just lean right over the top.
There you go. There's the answer. I surmised that could have been it. It also could have been coming.
And for a while there was a little sign sitting in this area here, like a little triangle thing, and it said, "Be yourself." And it always kind of made people kind of nervous because obviously there's two situations. A lot of people treated Walt as a god, and if you get too close to him, you get very, very nervous. But Walt's position was, I have to talk to you. We're working on stuff, and he did everything possible to calm everybody down so that they're at the same level. And people would get used to, well, it's just Walt. We have to work and stuff. But one of that little sign was kind of unnerving to people because a lot of people come in here from outside the company they're putting on their airs, and Walt would detect that and that eyebrow would shoot up. And the fact that the little sign was sitting there was like, you're silently looking at it.
Justin here, push the button. You saw this in the movie, but this was Walt's kitchen. And it's stayed there, and it's been used by every CEO since Walt. They used it all the time. Most of the materials that are in there are reproductions. Walt Disney did drink coffee all the time, and so there was coffee served to everybody who came to the office. And the only things that are in there that are actually original to the office are the glasses there on the left-hand side that are monogrammed with Walt's initials. And those were saved because they had Walt's initials on them. The rest of them are items that are just reminiscent of what he had in here originally. And the cupboards light up. You can see there's a GE logo on the inside. Those are metal cupboards. And when you open the cupboards, the light comes on. Those were put in 1940 by GE for him. This office, the studio here was one of the first commercial buildings in Southern California to be built with air conditioning. And so GE did the air conditioning and the electrical. It was very high tech at the time. The stove that you see in there is the original stove. They would cook chili or heat up things in there, and Walt would go down, normally and eat his meals down at the commissary, which he had a special table down there in the executive dining room. So he would eat most of his meals, but occasionally they'd send food up to him or he'd fix something up here.
You'll notice the various brands of foods, and on the left is Spam. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Spam, but that was a type of food that was used for World War II for people to be out in the field for weeks at a time. You just open a can and eat that stuff. So it had a very bad reputation, but Walt loved Spam.
Yes, he did.
And you go to the museum and you'll see his handwritten list to the cook, different things he wanted, and it was always Spam.
He loves Spam, and he
Well,
drank V8 all the
In
time.
recent decades, Spam has come back as a classy historic food now. Yeah, it's promoted very heavily because actually, if you develop a taste for it, it's pretty tasty.
On the wall, on the canvas, you see is a view around 1940 of what that side of the room would have looked like. That back corner is this corner here. So what you're looking at is roughly about where you're standing, what that would have looked like during that time period. The table is the same table you see below it. The airline chairs of a similar style. All kind of designed by the supervising designer of the studio, a gentleman named Ken Weber, who we've dedicated this room to. The Archives has treated this as a rotating display, so everything you'll see in here is dedicated to Weber's work to helping design the studio. It's timely because this year is also the 75th anniversary of our move here to Burbank. So it's being the 75th anniversary of Burbank Studio, we figured it was a natural fit. The first place I'll draw your attention to is over here with the photographs and the document case. These highlight Weber's work specifically. You see an example of one of the watercolor renderings he did for the studio. Examples of documentation, a clock he designed before coming to Disney. The photographs up on the wall highlight Walt and Weber talking about and showcasing the furniture that would be created here for Disney, all of our animation furniture. Along the back wall behind most of you, you'll see some examples of those Weber designed pieces. The blueprints hanging on the wall show most of the suite of furniture that Weber had a hand in designing for our artists here. This Burbank campus really was meant to feel like a college campus. It was meant to be a livable space. Everything was designed from the corners and color palettes of the buildings right down to the furniture that populated all of the rooms. Ken Weber being the tying factor between all of them. The animation furniture you see is original. It was used by our artists for many, many years. Most of the set dressing on top are reproductions, save for the animator models that you'll see. Those are original animator models, figural creations that helped our artists think three-dimensionally. Those were created for The Reluctant Dragon, which was our 1941 film that showcased the then new Disney studio. Later in Walt's life, this was where, at the end of the day, he would come to relax. There was traction equipment in here to help with his back problems. This was kind of really his most private space. Actually, just a couple weeks ago when Walt's granddaughters were in here, they remembered coming in and actually doing their homework in this space. So think of it as kind of where his getaway was. This far corner actually would have been a restroom at one point in time. The only holdover from that is this little hint right here. The window's lofted for privacy. That's where you can see the difference. So right about here, there would have been a wall with a restroom facility and a shower. And exits back out into the hallway, so it kind of completes the suite. It's a great place for us to be able to showcase all of the items and stuff that doesn't necessarily fit in the office, but that helps tell Walt's story beyond his working offices. So if anyone has any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Yeah, like I said, we don't have any other pictures of what it looked like in here when Walt used it. It was a very private space, and most people that worked for Walt had never come in here, but the girls, the children, like I said, used to come in. And Hazel George, who was the studio nurse, would often give Walt a therapeutic massage at the end of the day, as he said he had a polo injury and had a bad back, so he would come in here in the evening, she'd give him a therapeutic massage, and then he would drive home afterwards. But she was kind of his sounding board, so she was one of the few studio employees that ever came into this room. They didn't come in here very
Like
much.
a lot of studio executives, Walt never used a limousine. He always drove his own cars. He had rather ordinary cars, and
You like convertibles.
he always convertible.
Yeah.
And he didn't mind driving a 3-year-old car. It was I know when I started here, I had a 51 Cadillac convertible, and he had a 50 Cadillac convertible, and I would get some odd looks, like this kid comes in, his car's newer than all. What is this? But he liked the convertible, but he didn't have to be flashy, and it didn't have to be new. And the only extravagance he ever did was when the little Mercedes came, the 240 SL,
Yeah.
which Diane still had,
Yeah.
the family still has it. Little Mercedes, he was driving on the
John
street.
Lasseter
Huh?
just bought it from them.
Oh, that's it, yeah, okay, the little tan car. No, Walt always had like a Four Thunderbirds, things like that, after the Cadillacs. He had a
No,
brown
Don
Packard.
Hahn, not-
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
Don
he had a
Hahn.
brown Packard that Ed Sullivan gave him, but it didn't last long because it was pretty ugly. But one day he told me, I was just driving down the street in Beverly Hills and I saw this little car and I drove in there, it was a Mercedes dealer. He says, why didn't he just walked in and bought it? So he was showing it off to everybody in the first month, and it was kind of, well, you're usually not very flashy, you know, but he said, well, yeah, it's a little tiny 6-cylinder car, it's all right.
So something I've been dying to ask Bob, you might be able to answer this. When you were up here, what was the pace like in the hallway? Where was it constantly people in and out all day? Was it frantic or was it kind of?
No, I never saw things frantic. It was businesslike but real friendly.
Mhm.
See, everybody went by first names. Hardly anybody ever wore a tie here very much. The tie didn't come till Michael came over. Michael, everything was tie, you know, and then Bob shows up and now the ties, there's not so many ties, a little bit more like what it used to be. But it was a businesslike but friendly. I'd have to characterize it that way because everybody was so busy trying to get everything he wants done. And in those days, we didn't have like classic type of project managers and coordinators. Everybody pretty much talked to one another to get stuff done. No major, meetings weren't like major meetings. You know, Walt would just, generally he would walk around to all the other places on the lot to see what's going on, and if 2 or 3 people stood for 5 minutes, that was a meeting. Because, no, stop, think a minute. If you have layers of management like we do today, you make a request, it goes down through layers which have agendas, then the answer comes back up filtered through agendas, and by 2 or 3 weeks goes by before the executive got the answer. Walt just gets up and goes and sees it with his own eyes, and if something's not quite right, he sees it immediately, but he won't chew people out. If it's going wrong, he'd walk over to you and says, say, Kevin, did you ever think, well, what do you think if? And that's his way of saying, well, your stuff is not good at the moment, but could you think of a better way to do that? Because that always leaves you willing to contribute more, but if he walked up and chewed you out for something, you're not going to give him another idea because you're going to get hurt for it. I mean, that was a big distinction here, was what if, when he sees something that needed to be improved? Did it to everybody. The shops, the machine shop, I think, was a favorite. He always hung out in the machine shop because he liked mechanical.